So, since 1972, humans have not been in the moon. Actually, if you've read this book, The Last Man on the Moon by Eugene Cernan, he has been the last person, the last human being to actually step on the moon. This was back in 1972. So why are humans going back to the moon? And actually tomorrow, April 1st, 2026, the Artemis 2 mission will take 4 astronauts around the moon for the first time in more than 40 years. So what is the reason behind this? First, I wanted to talk about the reasons why the Americans, the United States, is returning to the moon. And then I want to share with you some technical challenges that have to do with actually building a mission like this, going to the moon, flying around, or even landing, as the Artemis 3 mission will do. Some of the technical engineering challenges and why this has not been done. Many aspects of these missions have not been done until today. So let's see this. Let's start with the reason of the video, why the US is returning to the moon. So actually, today I'm very well suited to answer this question because I have the book of Gene Cernan in my hand, of the last human to land on the moon, and also the t-shirt of the Apollo landing service module, which is the command. You have different parts to the Apollo module, the Apollo vehicle. One of them is the lunar module, and the other one is the service and the command module. But today we're not here to talk about Apollo. I thought it would be nice to be suited for the occasion by wearing Apollo merchandise. So, starting with the reasons. So the biggest reason why the United States is going back to the moon, as engineers will tell you, is China. China is planning on going to the moon, and the United States doesn't want to be second in this race. For those of you that remember the Apollo missions, they were essentially they were essentially part of the Cold War and the Soviet-American race to space, and essentially the race to the moon, which the Americans eventually won. And nowadays, 50 years later, there's still a race going on, which is right now Russia has been left out of this race, and right now it's between the Americans and China. And many engineers believe that Chinese are trying to land in the moon, and therefore the Americans want to get there before, right? So, in fact, Neil deGrasse Tyson, which is one of the best, for me, it's one of the best physicists out there, said that the only way in which we would land in Mars in the next 7 months would be if the Chinese said that they would land at Mars in the next year or so, and in that case the Americans would prepare all the hardware in 1 month and they would make the trip in 6, because it takes 6 months to travel between here and Mars, and in 1 month you can create the architecture. So Neil deGrasse Tyson said this regarding Mars, but it is also applicable to the moon, right? So again, China is a big reason behind Americans going back to the moon. The other reason is building a long-term human presence, and also being the first to establish the long human presence there, because the Apollo missions did not create a sustainable long-term human architecture for humans to still live and create life in the moon. We just went there, we did some experiments, we took some rocks, and then we flew back. And now the objective with this Artemis missions is to start building the infrastructure needed for humans to actually establish on the moon, and in the future be able to create bases and transport media and essentially put a firm foot in the ground in the moon, not what was done in the 1960s and 70s. The second reason is, of course, preparing for the Mars missions, because the moon is just 3 days away, and as I said, Mars, depending on the orbit that you take, is 6 months away. So how are you planning on doing a 6-month trip if you cannot even do a 3-day trip? So essentially, if you want to go outside of if you want to go to a park, the first thing is to get outside of your house, and to do this consistently in a couple times, and to know that you're able to do it. And again, 50 years have passed. We know that we can do it, but we need to show it again, right? So preparing for Mars is the second reason. And this is also where SpaceX comes to play with the HLS, the Human Landing System, as we will see further ahead in this video. Also, some engineers believe that we can reuse resources, we can use and tap into some of the resources in the moon in order to use them for space flight travel to Mars. So, for example, some engineers believe that there is liquid water in the poles in the moon, and this could potentially be used by electrolysis to create hydrogen and oxygen separated, and then that can be used to run your engines, because hydrogen is a fuel and oxygen is of course an oxidizer. So you can potentially use this as rocket fuel in order to promote your Mars mission in the future. So that's the second reason, preparing for Mars. And then there's a third reason, which is sort of like an engineering myth, sort of this kind of engineering things that you talk in the aisles when no one is watching. And it's essentially that there were too many space shuttle parts lying around after the space shuttle era. I don't know if you know this, but space shuttle was discontinued like 20 years ago, mainly because it was not such a reliable and safe vehicle. I think it killed like 12 people. And the two biggest disasters are the Challenger and Columbia. And I think it was Challenger and Columbia. It could have been Discovery. No, Challenger and Columbia. And essentially it was discontinued, but you have a lot of architecture and a lot of infrastructure which was left there after the space shuttle was discontinued. And many engineers believe that some higher power at NASA said we need to reuse this infrastructure which has been left around, and therefore you see the SLS, which is the Space Launch System. We will look at it in further detail, but the Space Launch System essentially uses RS-25 engines, which are the liquid propelled engines of the space shuttle. They're exactly the same. They're using four of these. And also you're using the solid rocket boosters, which are exactly the same as the ones in the space shuttle. And I am absolutely sure that most of the contractors and the manufacturers that were working for the space shuttle were the same. And these people are, of course, very eager to cash in some more money. So, again, the third reason, which is having a lot of infrastructure left over from the space shuttle era because it was discontinued, is sort of like underlying myth. But I think it makes absolute sense for the Americans to want to reuse some of the materials and infrastructure and technology which they had developed that they never ended up using for these missions, because again it aligns with the other two objectives that I said. So let's see exactly what I was meaning when I said that they are reusing this. So let me show you. Let's open up a window so that I can show you. Okay. So here we see, let's start by looking at the RS-25 engines. So these are the RS-25 engines. These are the exact same ones that the space shuttle used. As you can see, this picture is the RS-25 engines in the space shuttle. And right now they're powering the SLS. So same engines. You can read more about the RS-25. Wikipedia is a really good source. Then the solid rocket boosters. Do you see these ones? They're exactly the same as these ones. Don't you see? Same. So that third reason that I said is kind of like a myth, but I think it's true. I mean, if you see how many components they're reusing, it makes sense to think that. So before I speak about the architecture of the SLS, which is the Space Launch System, let me talk about some of the challenges. Actually, we'll start before we talk about the challenges. We'll start with that architecture, just because I think it's a good way to introduce the RS-25. Just to finish the idea on the RS-25s, the RS-25s are essentially stage combustion fuel-rich engines, which means that they have fuel as the main fluid that circulates through the preburner, and then you use a little bit of the oxidizer for the preburner. and that's called a fuel-rich stage combustion. If you want to learn more about stage combustion engines, I will explain later what you can do in order to do that. But I will not be explaining in detail each of the topics that I'm detailing. There's more material for you at the end if you want to learn more about that. So again, the RS-25s, which are the main engines that go in the center of the rocket, same as with the space shuttle. This is why I believe that it's very similar. Here they're in the center of they're in the reusable vehicle, and for the Artemis 1, they're in the center, and this vehicle is not reusable, but it's still using the RS-25s, which is fuel-rich stage combustion. It uses liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen, ergo the possibility of reusing that, of creating that fuel in the moon. And what else can we say about this? It's very efficient, so anything that is LOX and liquid hydrogen is very efficient, because it creates as a byproduct. After the combustion, what's left is basically vapor, so water. And because it's a stage combustion, there's no gas generator, it's called a pre-burner. Again, making it even more efficient, because we do not dump the exhaust gas, we sort of reuse it. We reuse the exhaust gas as part of running the turbine for the engine. So having a stage combustion engine is much more efficient than having a gas generator, or also called open cycle. So now you need to know that stage combustion engines like the SR-25s are very efficient. This is why they were used in the space shuttle era. And also you need to know that the Artemis 1, what they're called the solid boosters, are essentially solid propulsion. Solid propulsion is different than liquid propulsion. It's not restartable. It doesn't have a cryogenic fuel and an oxidizer. It basically has packed fuel that is ignited with oxygen, or simply everything. The oxygen is even pre-included, pre-mixed into that solid fuel that you can see. Everything is sort of ingrained there. You can imagine like this is a simple way to explain it, like a giant firework. Essentially, you just need to ignite it. Of course, it's much more complex than that, but you can imagine it like a giant firework. Once you turn it on, you cannot turn it off, you cannot throttle it, you cannot restart it. So again, it's very useful for that initial punch, because it usually carries a lot of ISP, which is initially the amount of thrust that you can gain per second. Okay, and this is why solid boosters are typically used in missions like the ones to the moon or the ones for the space shuttle. Initially, they carry a lot of bang for your buck, as the Americans say, for the initial part of the mission. So now let's talk about some of the technical challenges related to the Artemis 1 mission. So the first big challenge is going to be re-entry. Okay. For moon missions, re-entry is typically 40,000 kilometers per hour. And for the so to give you a comparison, the ISS and the people that fly to the ISS and that re-enter the Earth, re-enter at 28,000 kilometers per hour. And the ISS is much closer than the moon, of course. Therefore, this is why they re-enter at 28,000 kilometers per hour. That is like 30 times... sorry, I said it wrong. 6 times the speed of sound. No, much more. Sorry, the speed of sound is like 1,000 kilometers per hour. It is 30 times the speed of sound. And if you re-enter at 40,000 kilometers per hour, then you are at 40 times the speed of sound. So this is a lot. Okay. Therefore, you need to create something that will endure that. And if we Google Artemis re-entry shield, which is, I will tell you, one of the most important aspects of the mission, you can immediately see that you will need some sort of material which will be able to absorb or to, in some sort of way, resist that immense thermal energy that you have at re-entry, especially at 40,000 kilometers per hour. The reason, the way that engineers cope with this in this particular scenario is by using something called the avocat, which is a particular kind of material And I think the ESA is behind all this. The European Space Agency, woohoo, Europeans, are behind this mission, or at least the Orion capsule, which is the one that the humans will re-enter on. And it uses an avocat, which is a material which I'll explain in a second, heat shield, ablative heat shield. Avocat is made of epoxy, silica, and honeycomb. So honeycomb is the way you create it, similar to honey panel. We can Google that actually. What's a honeycomb? I had other stuff, but yeah, you should probably see a honeycomb avocat shield. So honeycomb structures are like this. They're very resisting. And in particular, they used one which is very similar to the one used by Apollo, because also Apollo did a very similar re-entry at 40,000 kilometers per hour or less. Because again, when you're coming from the moon, imagine you're bringing out that extra dose of speed, of velocity, that when you enter the Earth you need to dissipate. So you need to use avocat if you want to. That's one way to do it. Avocat again is epoxy, silica, honeycomb, which essentially is a composite structure. And the most important part is that it's ablative, which means that it disintegrates. And by burning and disintegrating, it loses that thermal heat energy and eventually allows the rest of the capsule, the Orion capsule, not to burn while it's being re-entry. So during re-entry, the biggest issue you might have is that this thermal energy burns into your capsule, disintegrates it, and then everyone dies. This is what happened with the Challenger or the Columbia, I don't remember, when they re-entered the atmosphere and one of the parts of the wing, if you remember, was damaged because of the initial ascent, and everyone died because everything disintegrates and you are left with nothing, right? Or the humans are burned to death. In either case, not a nice death. So this one was a very important challenge during, and it's one of the highest technical challenges that engineers are facing while creating this. The second one is the orbital trajectory. So for the Artemis 1 mission, and I actually pulled it up here, the orbital trajectory that they picked, listen to this, is the longest one. It's called a DRO, distant retrograde orbit, and it's the longest trajectory that I don't think it's any human-made. I read that it was like the longest trajectory that has ever been done with the moon. Absolutely not the longest trajectory in history, because that would be, maybe re-entry trajectory. Oh yeah, now I remember. So if you think about, for example, missions like the Voyager 1 or 2, which are these satellites that have been sent outside of the solar system, which are the objects that have traveled the most in the history of human beings. These ones have traveled much further away than the Artemis 1 Orion capsule. But for objects that have also came back to Earth after doing those missions, I think the Orion capsule, this is what I read, the Orion capsule for the Artemis 1 mission made the longest trajectory in history. And again, it's using this DRO trajectory, distant retrograde orbit. Honestly, I'm not such a orbital mechanics kind of person, so I'm not going to explain a lot about this. It does seem like a normal trajectory that they're doing, but apparently it might have its complications. I'll look more into it and I'll tell you more in the next video about the Artemis mission. But one thing you need to know for the Artemis mission 2 is that they're not going to do the same orbit as for the Artemis mission 1. In fact, they're taking a much shorter route to the moon. Instead of 25 days, it's going to take them 10 days. And the reasons are obvious. You don't want to have astronauts flying in space for more time than they should, because you can imagine that the environment there is quite aggressive, it's quite hostile. And every second outside of the Earth's atmosphere is discounted time, as we say in engineering. So time that your humans or your engineers might die in any second. Your astronauts might perish because of any kind of problem. So you want to keep them as close as possible while at the same time completing the mission. Also, another thing you need to know about the Artemis 2 mission, I don't know if you knew this, they're not going to land, okay? They're not landing in the moon. They're just going to fly around, and they're going to show that the Orion capsule can actually re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. Okay, these are the 4 people that will fly to the moon. And apparently the mission is planned for tomorrow, April 1, 2026. We don't know. It might be postponed. I remember the previous launch window was in March, but it was postponed due to a valve leak. So a leak is whenever you are fueling your your spacecraft, if you notice that part of that fuel or that oxidizer is going away, and it's reducing the amount of fuel that you have, that means there's a leakage problem. And I think there was a leak problem with some of the liquid hydrogen. And actually, this is potentially quite veridic, because liquid hydrogen is such a small molecule, same as helium. There's a high plausibility that it might leak. So again, it might get delayed because they don't want these 4 lovely astronauts to die and perish in front of national television, and everybody will see it and stream it on YouTube. But hopefully they will launch tomorrow. So they will not land on the moon. That will be left for Artemis 3 mission. I will briefly explain how that's gonna show. But before that, let's mention the last 2 technical challenges that the Artemis 2 and the Artemis in general missions are facing. The other big challenge has to do with Artemis 3. So it's good that I wanted to introduce it, because I wanted to mention that one of the big challenges is to integrate the mission with the lander. Okay, so for Artemis 3 will land in the moon. Artemis 2 will not land in the moon. The way you land in the moon is by using the Starship HLS, which is the human landing system. Orion has no landing capabilities. So if you see the Apollo, I think the lunar lander is this one, if I'm not docking module, it says command module, service module, should be this one. So for Apollo as well, we actually have a picture. I don't know why I'm showing you this. Yeah, if you see, you have the service module on the bottom, and then you have the lander or the lunar module, which is the one that undocks from the service module, turns around, flips, and eventually, here, if you see it, it's hidden, and eventually you land with this. So one of the 3 astronauts was left in this one. In the case of the first lunar, if you remember the first mission to the moon, you had Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, and Collins was the one who stayed in the command module while the other 2 went on the lunar module. So if you look at the previous picture, this is the service module, this one is the command module, and this one is the lunar module. And in the case, let's not talk about Apollo again, let's only talk about the Starship HLS and the Orion capsule. Orion again has no capabilities to land on the moon. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna use the Starship HLS. We as humans, not me. But for that, what they need to do is they need to send the Starship HLS. They need to make it depart from the Earth. It's gonna park in orbit. It's gonna be there for a while, and it will be, then you're going to send the humans on the 3rd Artemis mission on the Orion capsule, right? The astronauts will fly on the Orion capsule, same as with the service module, but they will fly on the Orion capsule to the moon. And there they will be met by the Starship HLS, which will be refueled in the Earth's orbit. And there are 2 challenges to this. One is integrating that, so making the HLS dock with the Orion so that the astronauts from the Orion can transfer to the Starship HLS and then land on the moon and then come back to the lunar orbit and then dock again with the Orion capsule and then transfer back and then go back. And you need to do this in the lunar orbit, right? So making that compatibility between the Orion capsule made by ESA and the Americans and the HLS made by SpaceX. So again, this is a partnership between a private company and a public company. This is one of the things I find the most interesting. And the other big, I would say, challenge about this is that HLS, the Starship HLS, before it flies to the moon, has to be refueled in orbit. And I think it has to be refueled by like 3 or 4 tankers. So you come, you park it in space. So the first Starship flies, it's parked in space. Actually, we have this here. Why don't we use it? Okay. It even has the engine. So Starship flies to the orbit. While it's parked in orbit, you have other tankers which come and park on top and refuel it. Okay. And one of the big problems about this is that it has never been done at this magnitude. So orbital refueling has never been done at this magnitude. It has been done only for satellites, small satellites, but never at this magnitude. And I think never with cryogenic fuels. And Starship uses cryogenic fuels. So I'll talk more about cryogenics in the future, but what you need to know is that it's really complicated and it has never been done. Like most of the things for this mission. This is why it's so exciting. And then one last aspect before we close it up. Again, technical challenge is integrating that solid and liquid propulsion. Same as with the space shuttle. You have a solid and liquid propulsion. So the one in the center is liquid propulsion and the one on the sides are solid propulsion. But in the case of this one, you have a different architecture and you need to show that it can be done consistently, right? I think that's going to be a lesser challenge than that previous integration, point number 3, the integration with the Starship HLS, because again, the fourth aspect, the solid and liquid propulsion, has been proved during the space shuttle era, but this orbital refueling with cryogenics plus meeting in the lunar orbit, you know, all the timings and the rendezvous and the docking of all this, what in orbital mechanics is called phasing, this is quite hard to achieve. Okay, so finally, I've talked about a lot of concepts in this video, especially related to rocket science, and some of them are related to engine architecture and things like this. I decided not to explain all of these concepts, but if you do want to learn more about this, I suggest 2 things. One, there's a course that I will leave in the comments and in the description below that I created that has the fundamentals of rocket science, in which you can learn exactly what I mean when I say, for example, what a staged combustion fuel-rich engine is. It's explained and it's detailed, and I have a full presentation plus notes that you can learn step by step what this means. And also you can learn what liquid propulsion is, what solid propulsion is, what's hybrid propulsion. And also you might be able to understand what it means to have an ablative re-entry heat shield versus having, for example, some other type of heat shield mechanism. So this is the first thing I suggest. If you are interested in rocket science and in understanding, sort of demystifying all these concepts that I shared with you today, that you sign up for the course. And it's a really good investment if you want to learn more about rocket science. The other thing I suggest, which has a lesser investment, but it's also quite smart if you want to keep in touch with rocket science and to learn more than what you just get from this video, is that you join the school community, which we created. And there you will get to ask questions about rocket science, which will be either answered by me or other engineers that have worked for the rocket industry, not just a chatbot or ChatGPT, but you will actually get to speak to people who have worked hands-on, like myself, with rockets and can answer questions not only about the fundamentals of rocket science, but also like how it's applicable and how it can be done in real life. Again, it's only for a limited amount of students that we will allow the school community, because we have to run it ourselves and we cannot have hundreds of students, but we will sort of define, I think it was 50 or 60 students that can join for a certain time, so that we can cope with their questions and actually provide them with the value that they're looking for. And then we will also be posting privately only to the members of this community. Once a week we will be posting news about rocket science and about rocket engineering, which again only members will be able to see. And lastly, a very important thing about this community is that you will have automatically, by joining this community, you have at least a 20% discount, and for some other courses even more, a 20% discount for the course that I mentioned above, the fundamentals of rocket science, and for other courses you will have 25 and 30% discount. So again, if you want to learn more about rocket science, those are your two options, and if not, just keep subscribed to this channel. I will explain more about I will talk more about things related to rocket science, about the Artemis missions, and about European rocketry comeback, things like that. Thanks for watching. Let's keep in touch. Bye bye.